gave it to me. So now I can do stuff like this. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, these are not, they're not that level. Simple enough, you run in here and then you come out here, hit another router, and that firewalls everything behind it, and then I'll just run everything in through here. I lose this wireless capability, but you know what I mean? Yo, young sir.
How you doing?
Doing all right.
How's your little Emily doing on her campaign?
The wind is kicking her butt. It keeps blowing all our signs all over the place.
No, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yo, young sir.
How you doing?
You know, like, that hasn't happened.
We had some stolen.
Well, yeah.
I think I had a couple stolen by a deputy sheriff
Really?
that was working for me.
Really?
Didn't like me.
Yeah.
And my sign's down at Walden. A great big 4x8 plywood sign by a granary down there. And it turned up yesterday after the figure.
That's frustrating. Yeah, that's frustrating when you go through all that work and then they disappear. Yeah, we had one. We live on the corner. We had one on this side, and one on that side. Now, one would have went missing. Some kid probably dropped it or whatever. But they were both of them. I don't know.
Oh, well. Sharon, the third time. Sharon called me. She said, Jim, I want a big sign. And I said, okay. So I dropped her off the sign. It was a good sized sign. But she said, well, Jim, I want a big sign. I took a 4x8 sheet of plywood and penciled the sign. It turned to a real estate down there. But a news station. They had some property down there. And it's pretty cool.
Mine's off.
Sorry, we turned them off.
Try
I
yours.
couldn't tell because the power went out back there and
Uh-oh.
everything, so I was trying to make sure all the sound was working. I couldn't hear anything.
Can
Check,
you
check.
hear us now?
I forgot my zoning stuff. I mean, you guys said to bring it.
Judy made make copies if you want to. I don't know.
Well, it said something about if you didn't have it, they'd make them, but I have 2 sets, so I got.
Hey, Judy.
The set out of my book too, if we needed. I didn't bring my set. I'm not gonna try thumbing through it, I'll just make notes on the handout if we need to.
All right, everybody. It is 5:30 by the clock in the back. I think that is their appointed time. Yes, agenda for the city council work session Monday, April 25th at 5:30 PM here in the City Hall Council chambers. Calling the meeting to order. Angie, would you roll call, please?
Nestle,
Here.
Tryon,
Here.
Bowles,
Here.
Lucas,
Here.
Garrett,
Here.
Condon,
Here.
Weaver, Woods.
Here.
Okay, welcome everyone. Open Meetings Act. A current copy of the Open Meetings Act of Nebraska is posted on the wall at the back of the council chambers. No formal vote or action will be taken at this meeting. I repeat, no formal vote or action will be taken at this meeting. As is the custom for our work sessions, we will be less formal. You don't need to request the floor. If you want to ask a question, just stick your hand up so we don't talk over each other, please. We also want to welcome, we have a few members of the Planning Commission here. Planning Commission members, you are certainly welcome to chime in on the conversation anytime you feel compelled or ask a question. However, I would ask that you come up to the microphone and there in the center. If you do so, just so the folks at home can hear what you're saying. We have several things on the agenda tonight. Well, excuse me, 3 things on the agenda tonight. Lane, do we have a guest for number 2 here?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And I feel like I should know our guest name, but I can't remember.
Yes. Herbert. Yeah, Herbert. Yeah.
Okay,
Who is that?
thanks, Jess. Jess, did you travel to come here? I did. Okay. Did anybody object if I move number 2 and number 1 around and we can do number 2 first? Because I imagine he'd like to get home before it gets dark if possible. So, you guys okay with that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So is that this?
Welcome, Mr. Reeker.
Thank you.
So we're going to officially do the discussion on the landfill study first. Please come up. If you would do us the favor of making sure that microphone is on, I can't see the red light, so I'm gonna guess it's probably not. Nope,
Work through this and kind of as a working document, kept going on several different iterations. So going through this, I like to talk, so I could take a 2-hour thing and we can cut it down to 15 minutes, just
15 minutes would be good, thank you.
absolutely. So please stop me and ask questions. If you have anything, there's details in this report. Couple things I'll say if I get to rattling here, if I start talking about the MSW, that's Municipal Solid Waste Landfill. That is your standard trash that comes out of your house. Or if I say C&D, that would be a construction and demolition landfill. So, totally separate entities. A construction and demolition site is very restricted to construction stuff, so you don't have to have all the expensive liners and things underneath. So, as we move into this, just kind of talking to Lane a little bit, they make sense to run together an MSW and a C&D site. Going through this, since the MSW site is more stringent, we did the citing for that with the idea that if you can cite an MSW site, you have no problem citing a C&D site. So we just use that criteria from the DEE. Basically, when you're moving forward with something like this, you have to pick out a site first. You guys kind of already have that south of town, so you've got a really good location that it was utilized for that, and you've kind of got some infrastructure set up for that already. Part 2, if you decide to move into permitting for a landfill, then you have to go through the actual siting for it. So there's a list of criteria from the Title 132 and the DEE regulations that you have to go through and meet in order to be able to even put a landfill on this site. So that was the number 1 criteria that we had to go through in doing this. The first few pages kind of discuss some of that. I have a citing summary that I'll just try to hit on here in the bullet points that come right out of Title 132. So when you look at it, they have an item, is it detrimental to waters of the state? Okay, we went through and you check your surface water and your groundwater. The site is not. The nearest surface water is Lake Maloney. It's over a 1/4 mile away. The groundwater direction and flow to the northeast should not impact that at all. You have a canal system that they would consider possibly water conveyance. That still should not be an issue. So any detriment to waters of the state should not be an issue. You should be able to meet that criteria. Road right of way, you have to have some distance from an existing highway or else have screening. You guys are over, I have over 3 miles away from 83, so that's not an issue. Airport, you must be over 10,000 feet away from an airport. You're over 4 times that. That's for birds and different things for the flight patterns and whatnot. So the airport thing is not an issue. If you did decide to move forward, you still need to work with the airport to get letters of compliance and whatnot, but as far as the site itself, that's not an issue. I will say too, in the back of this report, I won't have you flipping back and forth, but there is appendices that have drawings and figures related to these items in there. Floodplain, need to have at least a 100-foot buffer between a floodplain. We pulled the floodplain maps. Floodplain is not an issue for this site as well. Same with wetlands. There's one small wetland in the north central part. It was a pond. I think you'd struggle to maybe find any ponds these days, so I doubt there's much water in it now, but should not be an issue staying away from that. Unstable areas, we look into fault areas and things of that nature. There's nothing really in Nebraska, honestly, that meets that criteria, so there's not a problem there. There's some figures in there that show relationship to wells. One, you do have to have a setback from a municipal well, which we are plenty far away from that. Any other registered wells, there's really not a setback. They just look to see how there could be any impact. Your property boundary is over a quarter mile away from the nearest wells. So actually even moving back to where you might actually put this landfill is further away than that, probably closer to a mile. So the well issue is not a problem in the eyes of the DEE. Residential housing, I think there's one farmstead within a quarter mile, and again, that is of the landfill bound, or your existing property boundary on the north side of the canal. Other than that, there is some that could be, I guess I'm not for sure if they're considered residences or not, but the cabins around the lake, they're at least a quarter mile away as well from the property boundary. So again, not an issue as far as the siting. Industrial commercial businesses, the only one that could be considered out there would maybe be the marina at Lake Maloney. So again, far enough away. So really, as far as the siting goes, there is nothing in the criteria that would prevent you from citing this. So moving forward, there would obviously be more in-depth studies that would need to be looked at, but the first part, you pass that with flying colors.
In relationship to the municipal waste versus construction and demolition, is there any advantage to having 2 separate cells on the same site, one for construction and one for municipal?
Absolutely is. Moving into the options in this, it would be recommended to, if you were gonna put a municipal cell in, to also put in a construction demolition waste. A municipal landfill, you have to have a dual liner system. So it's either like a couple foot of clay or a synthetic liner, and then you also have to have some welded plastic over the top of that. So you have 2 liners. On top of that, you have a drainage layer, piping to take care of what they call leachate. Any water that hits waste is considered leachate, and you have to contain that. So it's a conveyance system underneath the ground. Pretty expensive to build. You have to do that for all your municipal solid waste. Construction demolition site, the waste that goes in is highly regulated. There's only so much that can go in, and so you essentially dig a hole in the ground. So you don't have the upfront cost to put it in there. That way you can, it's twofold. You can share that savings with the people coming in to deposit waste. If you have roofers or whatever, you can pass the savings on along to them in a construction demolition site. In the same time, you're saving your high dollar airspace in your municipal site. So there's definitely an advantage to that, and that would be a recommendation.
Thank you.
So moving forward with this, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Do you have to put any monitoring wells on the C and D site for water quality or?
Not on a C and D site,
Okay.
but you would on a municipal
Yeah.
site, so, yep. Moving forward with this, what we did was we kinda looked at, a few different options, and then Lane and I kinda tweaked a few along the way. So one option would be actually constructing a municipal solid waste site and a C and D site cell on site. Another option would be, kind of a spin-off of that. Assume possibility that, you build this, you still have haulers that have the option of where they wanna take it. So if you would build this, you could have the possibility that people would say, all right, you build a new cell, but we still wanna take our waste somewhere else, which in turn could cut your waste stream down in half. So those would kind of be things to look at. Another spin-off of that would be just constructing a C and D site alone, only construction and demolition, if the municipal solid waste didn't pan out. Then we were asked before to also look at alternate sites, which I think I can X that off the list right now. The reason you might look at an alternate site is if you have something set up for this existing site that you have, or it would not meet the criteria. Otherwise, if we were just to go out and purchase a piece of land right now, you'd essentially take what it would cost to build this landfill, plus about $2.5 million to set up a new site the way you already have it. So that was one of the options, and then the third option is just do nothing, standalone, stay the way it is. So moving through those options, the option one was to construct a MSW cell and a C&D cell. What Lane and I looked at was about 40,000 tons a year is the last, I think that was 5-year average is what we kind of looked at, what's being taken into the transfer station. Utilize that and try to put 100-year life on the cell. And then 20% of that waste, which come to be about 10,000 cubic yards a year of construction and demolition waste. So setting up those two sites, what we look at, again, this is a high level view. We don't have the topography survey design in order to be able to say exact numbers for excavation and things of that nature. So what you kind of look at is, say, on a 100-year site, we looked at approximately half of it below ground, the other half above ground. If you're picturing like a bread loaf, you'd have what's sticking out of the pan and then what's in the pan. So you build your phases of your cell below ground, and that's where your money comes in. It costs you every time you put this liner system in until you build the bottom part of the pan. After that, you can go over the top of it, and that's all gravy after that, because you're still over the top of the liner. You're not constructing anything else. So we kind of look at in a 100-year type system, we looked at 50 years below ground, 50 years above ground. You kind of have to tweak that a little bit. You don't want to build out 50 years of liner right now. It could degrade, it can wind erosion, it could blow in. We could have changes in technology that the DE says this is how you're doing it now. So we tried to put numbers on phases with some economy of scale and come up with about 6 approximately 8.3 year phases, I think, to get 50 years below ground. Putting those costs together along with the same type of a situation with the C&D site, spotting it more towards the south part of the property. I guess I should back up. I assume for people that don't know, your existing property is about 394 acres out there right now. You have an existing transfer station on site that is permitted. It's about 3.5 acres. That 3.5 acres sits on approximately 110 acres that you did have an old landfill on. So you're doing your transfer station, your scale house, all of your grass waste, wood waste, composting and whatnot over the top of that. Where we would look would be south of that, more out in the hills, so you have approximately 200 acres out that direction, which, like I stated before, that just pushes us farther away from any wells or houses or anything else. So in looking at that, 6 8-year phases. We tried to put some costs together. The flow would be the same. I mean, you still got people going out there to put waste in your transfer station. Having that transfer station on site is a bonus. There's a lot of landfills that would love to have that situation because you can utilize that to have the public dump in and keep them out of the cell itself. So you dig a hole out here, you build that for your cell, you have your commercial haulers go out there, they get a good system going with your people in the cell. You can keep your mom and pops dumping in the transfer station, and that is a much safer scenario. Keeps traffic flowing better. You just want as many people away from that big equipment as you can. So what we looked at was utilizing the existing transfer station in this option, half for C&D waste, half for MSW waste. You guys would have the roll-offs. It would be, or not roll-offs, but your trucks. It would be very similar to like what you're doing now, except when you turn and go to Ogallala to dump it in the landfill, you'd take it to your own. So we looked at operating that way. To do so, we have to have, it's a ways around this site, and by the time you start projecting roads and whatnot, we come up with almost 10,000 feet of road to put in. There is equipment that is necessary with this, a compactor, a dozer, a scraper to haul dirt. You continually have to do daily cover, things of that nature, so there's a pretty good fleet of iron that would be required. And then you have to build out on that as well. So breaking up in phases, it's a lateral type thing. You build one phase, as that fills, you add on, build the next phase, and so on. So what Lane and I tried to do is look at some cost figures on those, laying it out with projected life and kind of everything that needed to be put into it to start. Unfortunately, starting off, you have to have your iron up front, you have to have your roads in, so it's a pretty substantial cost up front. So I don't know if we want to get into that part. I gave Lane some numbers for construction and whatnot, just with the idea that in order to keep it kind of streamlined with what he has, there's some staffing things and whatnot. We'd have to add about 2 staff members, and he was able to take that and kind of put it into his asset management plan and move it forward to kind of see what we were looking at numbers wise. If you want to.
Well, so we did look at a number of different options. Basically your startup cost, if you're real conservative, maybe 9.5 million startup costs. We're probably looking more 10 to 11. Probably do a 20-year bond on that, and then your operational costs on top of that. And then originally, the landfills, the Lexington or Ogallala, they're somewhere in the $35 a ton range. We were hoping to charge that same amount. Can't make a cash flow at $35 a ton with our volume. We'd probably be in the red about $200,000 to $300,000 a year or better at that rate with that bond. When you go ahead then in 8 years and throw on the next cell, which is probably 3 to 4 million, and you're still paying off that first bond, just can't make a cash flow. Now, we looked at some different. We looked at doing a 10-year bond, so one of them is paid off quicker, so you don't have 2 bonds at the same time very long. But that just increases your amount. Basically what it boils down to, we need about 50% more volume than we're currently generating at our landfill. And we would have to probably be at around a $42 to $45 a ton range instead of the 35, which is competitive. And so, if we're going to be more substantial, more costly than the other landfills that are somewhat in the area, we're not going to be able to gain any business. And so getting that volume that we would need to make a cash flow just isn't there. I mean, and I did numerous different scenarios trying to get it. We even tried to run on a bare bones staffing to cut down on the staffing, which then, could get you into problems as far as just getting the thing to operate efficiently. Maybe not replacing the road going in, even though it needs replaced at the current time, and using that at a later date. And we just looked at some different options, and this would still be using some of our existing equipment as well. And unfortunately, I can't make it work with the numbers. So we also looked at just continuing to haul our MSW to Ogallala, and I'm pulling off the C&D waste separate and having a C&D site, which is an option. That would come close to a break even, possibly, with the upfront expenses and things. but there isn't tremendous cost savings there. We might be able to charge a little bit less to those contractors than we're charging at our existing facility now, but it's not a substantial savings like we were hoping for. So, I was disappointed. I was really trying to make the numbers work. I'm really trying to keep the trucks off the road and, have additional jobs here and things and save our citizens substantial money, but we just can't. With the cost of everything, I can't make it work. Basically, it just boils down to volume. If we had 60,000 tons a year instead of the 40, we could make a cash flow, but I can't do it at the 40 that we currently have. So, I guess the nice thing is though, with this report, let's say we have some growth and there's some growth in the area and there's some uptick in volume. We know that it can be done on our site, and so for future, down the road, and there may be some things. Technology today is a lot better than it was 25 years ago. There could be some new technology that drives those costs down as far as startup costs, and so, we have this in our back pocket. If things change or some volumes increase, we could look at it at a later date. But unfortunately, I just can't recommend to the council at this time that it makes sense to move forward with opening our own landfill. Ty?
Yeah, just a question for you on that. So when you were looking at that, does the trash collection that's privately occurs commercially and in the county included in your projected volumes there?
Yeah, we looked at with and without. I mean, right now we have with, and so, but we also looked at if they would decide to take theirs somewhere else without, but we did it both ways. Our current volumes are without it.
Okay. So if you took all the Lincoln County volume, it still numbers don't pencil out?
And we thought there might be a chance that some of the communities that aren't going there now that are even further from the landfills, that we may be able to pick up a little bit, but even talking about some of the communities in the area that we might be able to pick up, it's still maybe 7 to 10,000 tons. It wouldn't be to get to that 20. I mean, in our population radius, there just isn't probably 20,000 tons to be gained. Lexington's 55 miles away, and we're going about 70 miles to Oglala, so you'd have to split that distance in half. And then Holdridge also has a landfill within that parameter somewhat too, and I don't think we could pick up enough of the people that are going elsewhere now to gain that volume. Pete?
I really appreciate the honesty. A lot of times, organizations, cities, businesses, I know you kind of wanted to do this. I know that this was a hot button topic for you. We talked about it about 4 months ago. And I appreciate the honesty with you guys, because so often you get a report and they try and sugarcoat it and kind of, you could tell us what we want to hear, to be perfectly honest with you. But you guys are blatantly honest with us, and you don't see a way to go on this, and I appreciate it. And maybe in the future it does. We can shelve this for a few years and look back on it and see. But I really appreciate that, and I think the taxpayers do too, so thank you.
Keep in mind, please, this is not a great time to be estimating costs for things with $5 diesel. I mean, we tried, we upped the prices, which does not help things in that manner. So, I mean, like Lane said, maybe in the future, a person could look and retweak some numbers and see what could possibly happen, but things are outrageous now, and I don't know how you really estimate. I'd hate to say, well, I really think it's gonna go down, so here's what it's gonna cost, and then we're in a pickle. So, couple that with the need for a bunch of equipment to get started, it's a pretty big undertaking.
I do have one question, is the fuel prices, how much is that contributing to the increase of our cost on trash disposal?
We're probably seeing about a 20% increase in our fuel, which, that's a portion of hauling it out there. I mean, the wages and the equipment's also a portion. We looked at that with some increased fuel costs, but I mean, fuel costs, we'll probably have to quadruple from even where they are now before we get to the point where it makes sense just based on the fuel. I mean, wages have gone up with some other things, but to really get back to the point where we're at the same cash basis as we are now with our current operations, it'd be quite considerable. And, like I said, I looked at what if we cut down the personnel out there, what if we went on the real low side of what the estimates were for the equipment costs, and there was just too big of a gap.
Lane, I have a question. If somebody unloads their trash out there and it's recyclable, is there any sorting of that, or does that go with the landfill? It doesn't,
We do some sorting as far as appliances, some scrap metal and things we pull out of there now. Sometimes if there's some construction waste, and that's something we still may look at as far as some boards and plywood and some lumber and things, some construction waste that could be reused, say by Habitat for Humanity or something like that. That may be something, it'd be a little additional personnel, but to pull some more of that out, but we do right now, unless the volume's terribly high and the guys just don't have time to pull it out, we do pull out scrap metal and some different things now and recycle that.
okay, thank you.
So, just for my own information, we're spending about 35 a ton, you said?
Our cost at J-Bar J is about $32 a ton.
$32.
And then, of course, you have trucking, fuel and everything else. I estimate it costs us about $70 to $73 a ton, all into
That's gas down and back?
Yep. personnel, and that's the personnel at the transfer station, the scale house and all that as well.
Gotcha, thank you. It's still in cash flow at 70, wow.
Well, thing is, we're charging right now, our big haulers about $55 a ton. We've been way too low and we're gradually getting that up there. And there's some things that change off in there, and then our smaller haulers, we charge more than that, and plus partial loads. Partial loads are kind of what makes it, just because we charge more for a partial load and things, but, and then our in-town costs as well, but yeah, just, you know, would it cash flow if we were charging exactly the same rates as we are now? It would, but it doesn't make a lot of sense when for the customers, there is no cost savings for us to have that big cash outlay.
Gotcha. So even saving that's $70 it's costing now, charging, we still can't make it work.
Not to be in the position we are right now.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you, Jess. We appreciate you doing that. Thank you, Jess. We appreciate you coming out to, forgot to turn my mic on. And visiting with us this evening. Should we need you in the future, we'll get a hold of you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, have a safe trip home.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, this is why we do business analysis on these things. And thank you, Lane, for taking so much time and effort to really let us understand where we stand on this issue. Okay. Now, moving back to the, I switched number 1 and number 2 around. We will now move on to the discussion on ordinance number 4092 and so on and so forth as described on the agenda. And I know Judy has a whole stack of stuff to hand out there.
I handed out some already.
Don't forget to turn the mic on when you get up there, please.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of do a visual, because I like visuals. So, this zoning stuff that we're talking about. So this is the big book of ordinances that everybody, I think, has seen one, or maybe you have one, or you can look at it online. So when you look at what Planning Commission does, what I do, what Dave does also, is this whole section right here, okay? So when you look at this book, it's essentially half of the book. Is planning, zoning, building, okay? So, in order to tackle a review of this section, we felt that it was easier to take it pieces at a time. Instead of taking this whole section like this, we wanted to do it pieces at a time. So, I handed out a little color-coordinated table of contents. Planning Commission hasn't seen this, so I'll give them a couple of copies, because I only have a couple. So I handed this around. This is the table of contents. So this has everything, just as a heading for this, half of this book. So I color coordinated it into phases. We are going to look at the entire zoning portion of that big book, but in phases. The yellow on this page that you have is what we're currently looking at, what is currently in that ordinance that we have had at City Council a couple of times. It's the residential information. It's also some definitions, and if you look at this first page of this color coordination, in the orange, it says phase 1 and phase 2. Definitions is phase 1 and phase 2. So when you look at that ordinance that you have, that you've all seen, and you see pieces that are struck through and pieces that are underlined, so the strike-throughs are the things that we're getting rid of. The underlines are the things that we're adding. And then you see some that, are just there, like a definition for a business or a adult-based business or a home occupation or something like that. Those aren't being changed currently, but that doesn't mean we're not coming back to them. That means we're gonna look at them again in the next phase, because what I tried to do to make this a little bit easier and not such a daunting task was to take it in pieces. So anything that I felt had to do with residential, we put in this first phase 1. Phase 2 is going to be ag, commercial, home-based businesses, things like that. Phase 3 is going to get into some of the other things like conditional uses, amendments, planned unit developments. And on this sheet also, you're gonna have some stuff that's in blue. The blue stuff we're probably not going to look at unless the federal government or the state government comes in with changes. So that's floodplain regulations. Floodplain regulations, we deal with FEMA and NEMA and some of those. And so we usually don't like to tweak those unless we have some sort of a change at the state or federal level. Same thing with airport zoning regulations. That came from the Nebraska Department of Aeronautics at the time when they did that. So we're not gonna change that unless something comes down from the state that says, hey, we need to take a look at this changing. So that's just kind of some background on what you see in front of you. So what we're looking at with this ordinance, 4092, I think is what we called it, is just the residential portion. That includes residential definitions, and then all the residential zone districts. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a background so that you understand that we're not going to just do the residential and then stop. And as a matter of fact, on tomorrow's Planning Commission agenda, we've got the very first stages of looking at phase 2, which is ag, commercial, industrial, that sort of thing. So. What do you want to know? What do
Thanks,
you have
Judy.
questions? What else can I help you?
Thank you for your organizational efforts.
Okay.
Okay. I know there are people with questions, so. Do you have anything else you want? Oh, so go ahead, Pete.
I can start. And Judy and I have been talking. I'm gonna pass these around a little bit. Everyone take one and just take a look at that. I'm just making an attempt. In this Excel spreadsheet, and see if planning wants one too. I think there's enough. Couple things we talked about to begin with. We were gonna I was gonna make a proposed motion to change the definition of manufactured home, permanent foundation, manufactured home, skirted, and modular home. Ty and I, along with Judy and Dave Hahn, kind of got together on a Wednesday morning, and then these these are the new definitions. Basically, and just so everyone's on the same page, mobile homes and manufactured homes are synonymous. They're the same exact thing. Everyone in the free breathing world considers them the same. Prior to in 1976, it became politically correct to call a mobile home a manufactured home, okay? Because of the HUD modifications. Basically, a mobile home or a manufactured home has a steel carriage underneath it, and it's built on that steel carriage. That steel carriage maintains the load for that structure. A modular home is a completely different animal. A modular home was built just like a manufactured home in a controlled environment, in a factory, okay? but it's shipped out in one or multiple pieces and constructed on footers, on a foundation, and they actually have, their walls are the load-bearing portion of that. So a modular home is no different than the stick-built home, with the exception of it's built in a controlled environment, it's built in a warehouse. Mobile homes, manufactured homes, synonymous, are on, again, a carriage, and they can be placed on pillars. They can be placed on a foundation with pillars underneath, because that's still your structural integrity of the house. They have to be placed on footers underneath that steel carriage. So if you read through here, I just wanted to make sure that we're talking the same as the county's talking, because the county describes them this way. We need to do it this way, and we need to use the same terminology throughout the rest of the world and know that a manufactured home is that and a modular home is that. Any questions with that? Do you guys have any problems with that? We were gonna make a ton of amendments, so instead of making amendments, is everyone fine with these definitions, or look at them and see if everyone's okay there?
And the proposed definition change doesn't really change the bulk of what it is. It just clarifies what was already there, basically, so that everybody kind of understands it the same. When I read something, sometimes I might understand it a little bit differently than when Dave reads it, or when Pete reads it, or when the general public reads it. So we were just trying to get some more clarification so we know exactly what we're talking about.
So, and we looked at this from a banking standpoint, an insurance standpoint, a zoning standpoint, and a building construction standpoint, was why the four of us got involved in that, okay?
I'd just add that one reason we were focused on this is there used to be a lot of noise on this, because there was a point in time, and Jeff here can comment from the appraisal world, but there was a time where these definitions were crossing over. Because there was a time where people doing stick-built pre-manufactured homes were using the pre-manufactured or other segments, which is really modular construction for these definitions. And then there was a time frame where Fannie Mae and banks wouldn't conventionally finance certain methods of construction, which now that's more focused. And so there's been noise over the last 20 years in these definitions. And then the insurance world was different than the banking world, but now it's kind of all coming together. So we were trying to align with where this has come together. Is that fair from the appraisal standpoint too, Jeff?
Yeah. It makes sense to line them somewhat because they are different
Right.
in all senses, in the insurance, the lending, and right on down the line.
Yeah, and my frustration, the reason I wanted this, I go to the tax assessor's website to try and see what I'm trying to insure, and they have it as a mobile home, but someone else has it as a modular, and so let's all keep it standard for everybody. So I think this would align us with GIS, to be honest with you.
In most instances.
In most
yes.
instances, yes, that is correct. So. I know, I talked to them too. So that was that. And then the other thing that we just passed out, and for me, I'm a huge proponent of the KISS principle. And I'm referring to myself on the last S. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay? So, and I'm the stupid one here. So I asked Judy, I kind of went and redid this on an Excel spreadsheet because I was getting frustrated going back and forth to try and figure out where my structures lie in here. And so I've simplified this by beginning with dwellings. And I'm not changing any of the content that we have over in the RL, R1, R2, but I'm just categorizing things: dwelling seasonal, dwelling single family detached, dwelling multiple family, 4 max, and then 5 or more. Then I go to condominiums, and then I'm spelling out mobile home, manufactured home with an asterisk, manufactured home with a thing. Thank you. Carrot. And then modular home, RV, townhouses, just so that they're all in alphabetical order. The one thing you probably glaringly notice, and Ty and I talked about this, and I'm not gonna lay down or fall on my sword on this at all, but I have taken out cargo dwellings, shouses, quonsets, and tiny houses. The reason, my philosophy for this is, that is the terminology that we're calling these things right now. 5, 10 years from now, the way the English language goes, I have a hard time describing what my kids are telling me because they change terminology. So 5 years from now, they might have a 3D imprint house. They might have something. So we would have to continually update this for the newest, most modern type of dwelling. In my opinion, they're all categorized under the term dwelling, a common term. So then we let building codes, the International Building Code, take care of whether it's appropriate for the zoning purposes.
So currently, we don't differentiate cargo container dwellings, grain bin dwellings, Quonset houses. We don't differentiate that currently in our current code. They're dwellings. Dave and I, when we sat down and were going through some of these things, we thought, well, why not put them out there so there's no question? Now, with Pete's comments, I can see why we'd want to go back to just saying dwelling. So I don't have a problem either way. I doubt Dave has a problem either way. I'm guessing Planning Commission probably doesn't care how it's put out there. So, I mean, that's entirely up to you.
The argument the other way, and we're talking about this,
Yeah, we were.
is the argument the other way is that if somebody from Denver or Omaha or South Dakota or anything is on a Sunday afternoon going through the internet and looking at our stuff because they're interested in doing a modern project or some type of project and they see that in there, then I think, wow, these guys have contemplated this. They've have a modern look at zoning and you could somebody could see that as appealing potentially. So I think, in my opinion, that's the pro and the con, is you might shine your zoning code up a little bit, or ordinances up a little bit for somebody who has a modern approach at things, but then I agree with Pete's comments too about it, so. But I think if you were to argue the pro, that's probably it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it would be easy for somebody to come in and say, hey, I want to build a house. Dave's gonna know exactly what that is, I'm gonna know exactly what that is, everybody else is gonna know exactly what that is. Whereas they may come in and say, okay, I'm gonna do a dwelling, but it's gonna be my shed, so, yeah. But, I mean, either way, in my opinion, is workable, so it's however you wanna look at it.
I think we might be able to handle that by, if you look at what's page 51, there's kind of a general definition of dwelling. It says dwelling shall mean any building or portion thereof which is designated and used exclusively for single-family residence purposes, excluding mobile homes. We could possibly put something in there that says
To include.
to include shouses,
House,
et cetera.
cargo containers,
Cargo,
yeah.
And then maybe only once every 5 years, we'd have to add a word or two to that or something.
You'd have a fairly easy change every so often.
Yeah. Keep up with the current vernacular, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Then people who are looking in your example would find something that would be appealing to them, theoretically. So,
Yeah.
C and P, current and proposed, in your spreadsheet. You have two Cs and a whole bunch of Ps. What do these stand for?
Oh, no,
Permitted.
that's, and this is the only thing I'm changing is the very first,
Right, so
line
you
here.
have the letter C and the letter C.
sure,
What are they?
refer to the key up top, conditional use permit
He doesn't have
is a
that.
C.
He
Okay.
doesn't have that.
C would
It's
be
in-
required a
C is
conditional use
conditional
permit.
use, P is permit.
P is permitted.
Okay, all right.
I guess I just want to make a comment. I'm an old farm girl, so when you're talking about cargo container dwellings and grain bins and Quonsets next door to a nice looking house, you got to be kidding me. Is that what this is doing?
I should have brought some pictures, because yes, I can totally understand what you're thinking right there,
Yeah.
is just this metal circular grain bin and they're gonna put windows in it. And I can get Dave up here if you want to talk to him, but your building code is probably, I mean, more than likely, they're not just going to be able to do that. They're going to have ingress and egress windows, doors, things like that. It's going to look more similar to a house than what you think. Now, it probably wouldn't be my choice of where to live, but some of them, and if Ty's gonna bring up some pictures, some of them are gorgeous, honestly. They are gorgeous.
But do
But
they fit in that, in,
the cost of construction to make it a dwelling is probably more than likely going to be too expensive, and people will revert to stick-built homes. That's what we've seen with, people have wanted to use cargo containers as garages. And please, Dave, jump in if I'm wrong. And they have come in, and with the requirements for the footings, foundation, those types of things, they have actually opted to go with stick-built garages because the expense was more than what it would have been if they would have just built a stick-built. So the likelihood of somebody doing that, they're really gonna want to live in a grain bin house to do it. And I'm not saying you won't have somebody do that, because you may.
Pete and I had the discussion of, he made the same comment to me about what if this was built right next to a normal residential house, and I said, if you wanted to have the counterpoint, the point would be, well, what if somebody painted the house next to you bright neon or bright pink, you know, or some obnoxious color that a lot of people would see as an obnoxious color, what's the difference? And so that's the,
Absolutely right.
yeah, you would hope that if they're making that kind of investment, that it's something that, you know.
And to that point also, these are allowed now.
Yes.
We're not, nothing's being changed here. All this stuff is allowed right now. We're drawing attention maybe more or less to it. We're at least defining it. But as long as it passes Dave's inspection, they can do it right now. And you can't prohibit people from doing it. Now, and Ty brings up a good point with covenants. You know, some areas of the community probably don't allow this, or, you know, I know some parts of the community want used to be a wood roof. Down in Leota, you used to have to put a wood roof on your house. That's changed now because of what's gone on with wood and how they're insured and everything, but, you know, so covenants of an area, so you have zoning, then you have covenants, which makes it more restrictive for that area. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, most areas in town have some type of covenants. I never did check on that.
I don't know if I would say most,
Okay.
but there are a lot of areas that do have covenants on there. Now, the city does not enforce covenants. Those go to civil court if a homeowners association or a neighborhood says, look, we have covenants on these properties, you guys aren't following them. They say, well, zoning lets us do it, that's fine, but they can take them to civil court to enforce that covenant. So yeah, there's a few, Lakeview, some areas in Leota, but that's all on the developer. When the developer goes in and does that subdivision of 20 lots, they have a choice of putting covenants on there if they want to, or allow zoning to do its job. It's whichever.
Covenants and subdivisions in North Platte, I've done a little bit of research in this, are generally about a 1990 and later issue. There might have been, I mean, there were some before. If you go back way in history, there would have been covenants that are illegal now that might have pertained to somebody's religion or race or something, but that's all an old thing of the past that's illegal now. But if you look at modern covenants in North Platte, it's generally been like 1990 and later subdivisions. So if a developer was to come into North Platte today, it would be likely they would put some kind of covenants in their subdivision to restrict, you know, certain building. But an example that we have talked about is that if somebody's house burned down or there was a infill lot, then you have to imagine that they would have, the freedom to build this kind of structure if they chose to.
And there are some communities that do get into what I would call dictating taste. Their zoning code does say you can have this color paint, you can have this, this kind of fencing, all this kind of stuff. North Platte's never been that way, and I'm not, proposing we do that by any means, but I'm just saying there are communities that do dictate taste. We have just never been one to do that, so.
Did you have any other
alterations you were planning to propose?
That's the two biggies. That, in my mind, that cleans up a lot.
Judy, a question I have for you is, if in the going through the phases, do you think we're gonna be disconnected while in process? In other words, like if we do phase one and then you have 2 and 3 pending, do you feel like the definitions and everything are gonna work together decently during the interim period where we're not gonna have any problems?
I think they'll be okay. I mean, I can't completely tell you 100% that I got all of them I needed for this section. But I think we'll be okay to where we're not changing anything in the commercial, so the definition shouldn't matter at this point because it's all the same until we get through the commercial area. So we should be pretty good. I think it's workable.
And you don't plan to be in transition for too long? I mean, this is fairly
No, absolutely
high
not.
priority, isn't it?
I was hesitant to put a date on there because this has already been delayed and I was hoping to actually have this completed by now. So I was really hesitant to put a date on there. But no, tomorrow night, we're already starting with the commercial, rewrite, ag, commercial, industrial, some special events, home occupation I think I have on there. What else am I missing? I think that's it. Performance standards for industrial, that sort of thing. We've already got that on the first initial conversation with Planning Commission. So I foresee that going to Planning Commission probably 3 times at least before public hearing. So probably 3-4 months, and you guys will see that back here with the commercial section.
So Judy, on this definition, excuse me, on this definitions, does that mean just because there's a definition in there that North Platte could accommodate that sort of business somewhere? I'm talking
So
about
what, go ahead.
the sexual nature of businesses.
Yeah, that's already existing. We already
Okay.
have a sexually oriented business section that we adopted, oh gosh, I can't remember. It was before you guys were on council. Probably about 2006, 2007, something like that. There's a whole section on adult-based businesses. So that definition is there. We're not changing that. It's possible that we might change that definition later, but not right now. But that one will stay there because we do have a section that pertains to. Does that answer your question?
Well, I don't know if I was a younger person, can I hang my red light at my house? I mean,
I'll have to pull that section and look,
Where are we
honestly,
going
because
with it?
I haven't read that in quite a while. We've only really had one that I had to go back and take a look at that code, and that was for Dr. John's and the proximity to the church that was there. So we had to go back and revisit that a lot, but I would have to go back and look at it. We don't get that one a lot, so I don't spend a lot of time in that code.
We were on the planning commission when that came through, and as I recall, G, you probably remember the history better than I can, but that got adopted out of concern of not having it, right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
we, at that point in time, what we were looking at was that it was kind of the Wild West without having it, and the city's ability to maybe defend themselves against requests that a lot of people would find undesirable was the concern. So that, I think that was added, I mean, at least with my intent at the planning commission, but I can't speak for everybody else's intent, but I think it was added as a, we need to have some rules and restrictions and barriers here that are reasonable. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's 100% fair, because at the time, these types of businesses were popping up quite a bit. And so they wanted to make sure that we had a way to regulate them, because prior to having that in there, they could have went and located by Bible Supply if they wanted to.
well, I know back in the 80s, I think it was on Jeffers or Dewey, one of those 2 streets, there was a shop.
And at that time, we didn't have any of those regulations in there, or at least to my knowledge.
So I just wondered if we were going back to a little Chicago, Sexual Encounter Center. What the heck is that?
That's a definition.
That's a definition, yep.
It's not saying we allow it.
No.
So you'll see in the
saying
next
it is.
phase.
Well,
No,
it's
that's
not that we
just a
allow it, that's just a
definition.
definition, so that you
Okay,
know
that
if
was
somebody
my
comes
question.
in. Okay,
Is the
I
definition,
apologize.
does that mean we
Yeah.
have to allow it?
No, that's
Okay,
just
gotcha.
a definition, so we'd have to go back
feel a little better now,
to
thank
the
you.
code. I mean, that has a whole entire code on its own. It's
Okay.
about 12, 15 pages, something like that. We'd have to go back there and look and see. But those types of businesses are only allowed in B2 districts and then industrial. Industrial by right, I think it's B2 by conditional use. But in the case of the current one that we have right now, they are not even considered an adult-based business because less than 25% of their merchandise is focused on those types of things. So if over 25% of their merchandise was focused on toys, then they would be considered an adult-based business. So.
Somebody's gonna check that out.
She's not talking kids or us either.
No, I'm not.
Moving on. Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
Excuse me, Judy, how do you anticipate addressing the issue of camper storage in particular, not mobile homes, but pull type, fifth wheel, and possibly even, I guess you call them motor homes? I notice a number of people that have their motor home or their fifth wheel camper parked on their property. And given the way it's written, I think they certainly are not acquiring the 25-foot setback in the front. And they're probably not acquiring the side setback either in some cases. What are we gonna do about that?
Okay, so if you're talking just pull type campers, right now, people can put them in their yards. They can even, right now, park them in their front yards, as long as they're licensed, as long as they're operable. They park them in the street, I'm not exactly sure, March to November, March to October, something like that, they can do that.
Right.
I don't foresee us changing that for your own personal trailer. Now, I think when you get into things, for instance, a person on a residential lot storing 15 camper trailers for their neighbors and their friends and their daughters and their cousins and all those individuals, that gets into a different story. Because in zoning, and especially you have residential zoning. So in a residential zoning, the primary use of that property is for that dwelling. So if you have a vacant lot, you own this lot, you own this lot, but they're two separate lots. This one's vacant. The vacant lot is still in the residential district. That vacant lot's primary use has to be residential, which means it is a dwelling. The primary use is a dwelling. So you can't fill that lot with your neighbors and your cousins and uncles' camper trailers because the primary use of that is supposed to be residential. The primary use of what they're doing by using that just to simply store campers, the primary use now becomes either commercial or becomes industrial because that's storage.
And I wasn't referring to that specifically, that's probably a different question, but I was thinking more of, and you mentioned campers, are you talking fifth wheel and pull type or just?
Fifth wheel, even the, what do you call the ones that people drive, the
Motorhome?
motorhomes? Yeah, if they're personal, you can still park those on your property. As of right now, that doesn't mean it won't change. That doesn't mean it won't change 6 months from now or a year from now or whatever. But right now, the current way that it is set, you can park your camper, whichever it is, fifth wheel, bumper pole, or a motorhome on your property.
And there's no, you're not intending to change that?
I have no intention to change that right
Okay,
now.
I mean, in our
Unless
current-
direction comes to me to
Okay.
change it. Right now, I have no intention of changing that.
So then changing gears on the folks that do have a side business in some cases, aside to their dwelling.
Careful.
How do we deal with them? I mean, I went by 12th Street the other day and I saw at least two that have signs out in front, camper storage, $12 a day or whatever they're charging, I don't know.
So what we're looking at in phase 2, so it's not going to be in this residential portion that you're hopefully adopting soon. In the phase 2 that we're looking at a couple of different things. One, again, is rezoning some areas. So like we're doing with the residential, where we're taking out the R4, we're changing that to R3, changing the mobile home parks to an RM. We're going to do the same thing with commercial. So we do currently have what we call a business transitional zone. So business transitional or neighborhood transitional, I can't remember exactly what I called it, but something like that. So it's basically a mixed use zone. So I can see on 12th Street, in my mind, and Planning Commission may agree or disagree when we get into the discussion of this, but I can see some areas on 12th Street being that neighborhood transitional or residential, commercial transitional zone to where they would be allowed to do those kinds of things, because you've got an area that's very high traffic, that there's a lot of businesses going on that maybe should or shouldn't be there, but for whatever the fact is, they're there. And maybe that is an area that we should look at, instead of just saying it's residential, maybe it's a mixed use. So it can slowly transition to more of a commercial, or you can also keep it residential if you want to. So that would be like a mixed use district. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is going through, again, in phase 2, we're looking at home occupations or home-based businesses. Those two are a little bit different, but we can combine them into one. But still, there are some types of home occupations that probably should just be allowed. Things like somebody who, due to COVID, have now transitioned to working from home, like maybe they're an accountant, or maybe they work for the bank and they work from home. They don't have a lot of foot traffic in and out. That would be something that would be very reasonable to be a home-based business or a home occupation or something like that, some type of an office like that. Now, the problem that you get into is, we'll take like a contractor, for instance. Yeah, they can have a business in their office, pretty easy in their house, and they can do bids and all that kind of stuff. The problem you end up with is if you get a lot of foot traffic in and out, you're going to ruin the residential characteristic of that area. Or if you have construction storage in their backyard, that's going to cause a problem with that residential area, because you're going to have a lot of what other people would consider junk in their yards and foot traffic in and out, which deteriorates from the residential nature of that neighborhood. So that's something you probably wouldn't necessarily want, depending on the area. But that's kind of where we're going to go. But that discussion is going to start tomorrow night at Planning Commission, and again, probably 3-4 months, and then it'll come forward to you guys.
Okay, so within that description, is there a possibility of a conditional use permit? And if I'm understanding correctly, a conditional use permit essentially would be a public hearing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's.
So if the neighbors don't have a complaint with, I know one particular family that they have I guess it is a construction business. They have cinder blocks stored on their lot. They have mortar paddle mixers on their site, and technically, legally, I'm sure this is zoned residential. They're probably in violation of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been there as long as I've been in town, and that's 40 years.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with some types of conditional uses, but again, we're gonna strike up that conversation tomorrow and
Okay.
get it started and get the ball rolling.
Back to the campers again.
Okay?
Are they gonna be required to have a concrete pad to park them on?
As of right now, we haven't been down that road yet. That may be something that's going to come up later. I don't think it's in this revision of anything right at the present moment. I think it's a very good idea to do something like that, for the simple fact, and hear me out before anybody gets upset. For the simple fact that if you are storing one of those on site, if you have a surface like concrete or rock, it's easier to take care of. Whereas if you pull a camper into your side yard and you leave it there, and yeah, you have good intentions, you're gonna go camping, and you never move that thing, that's a good place to harbor rodents, for weeds to grow, because you just can't take care of it. You just don't take care of it. But if it's a surface like concrete or maybe gravel, maybe something like that, it's easier to take care of, so it looks presentable. But the last thing you want is campers parked and weeds growing up all over them, and then we're after you to clean up your mess, so it makes it easier.
Well, weeds would put them in a different violation
Yes.
if I'm understanding.
Same department, different violation.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other discussion on this material? Was clarifying the forward steps useful to everyone?
Excuse me?
Was clarifying the forward steps, so the colorized, this document, did that help everybody understand kind of the approach? That's good. I don't know if that was Judy's idea or if it was Lane's idea. Thank you for coming up with it, whichever one of you did. Okay, if there's no further discussion, then we'll move on to number 3, which is a presentation by Lane, or a discussion, excuse me, on user fees, but first a presentation by Lane.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Lane.
Members of the planning commission that are now sneaking out the door, we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I think you turned that off, Lane.
Did I turn off? There we
There you
go.
go.
Is
That's
that better?
better. Thank
All
you.
right. I have a little slide presentation. I've given you the materials in front of you, but we will try and run through this. So, now if I can get this to work. There we go. We wanted to look at different ways communities, other communities, do things to lower their property taxes and what revenue streams they have. So looking at the city of North Platte, over the years, we've had declining revenue streams, occupation taxes on telephone landlines, cable television, state municipal aid is always up and down, and then other sources have dramatically declined over the last few years. Some of them are unpredictable, some of them go up and down over the years. The telephone taxes, the cable TV, those have continually gone down as different technologies have come into place. Financially, even though the city, and I think when we look over our budget years, the city always has fiscal restraint. We always try to have a very flat budget, try not to have too big of increases. I mean, keep our increases as minimal as possible. Expenses continue to rise. This year obviously is a little unprecedented, but it's not unusual for costs to go up. The citizens of North Platte expect and they deserve the highest level of service from the city government. Services cost money. We all know that keeping the roads up, getting the trash hauled, just planning and development, it all costs money. Normal costs continue to go up. Since 2014, the city of North Platte has gradually lowered its property tax levy. At that time, the property tax levy was 51.87 cents. Right now, we're at 44.22. So the city's worked over the years to lower the property tax rate. Property taxes make up about 22% of our general operating budget. So looking at this historical information, like I said, we looked at our peer cities in Nebraska to try to determine what other user fees, occupation taxes, and maybe unique funding sources are being implemented across the state to offset and lower reliance on property taxes. Various cities with lower property tax levies use a variety of funding sources to pay for city services. Some of them are very heavy on user fees, and that's how they get their property taxes down. What's hard is no two cities have the exact same fee structures on anything. And so we looked at a variety of cities to try and look at what they have. We looked at trying to determine large revenue, low staff resource opportunities. We don't want to implement some kind of a fee, but it takes a lot of city staff, and so whatever you're offsetting with a fee coming in is offset with a lot more resources having to be thrown at it. Then you look at what does it take to authorize that funding source? Is it an ordinance, a resolution, or just a rate determination? And finally, you look at the possible budget effects with that source and if there's ways to use that to lower your property tax levy. So this next slide shows some of those revenue sources that have changed over the years. The largest one is your telephone occupation tax. As late 90s, early 2000s, cell phones started taking over everyone's pocket, and a lot of people started getting rid of landlines. So you look at in 2003, telephone occupation taxes brought into the city about $143,000. As of last year, that's down to $41,000, so over $100,000 decrease in those fees. And, most of those rates have gone up, so you expect, some increase in that from that 143,000 base that we had there. But it's gone down considerably as people have got rid of their landlines. Cable TV is another one where people are now streaming, using streaming services, et cetera. The city, it's by federal law, you can't have a occupation tax on, or a separate tax on internet services because of accessibility. But cable TV has been replaced by your Netflix and your Rokus and different things like that. As you see, 2015 was 392,000 and last year was about 330,000. So that's gone down fairly significantly on the cable TV. Also, rec center complex rentals, which not really sure why, but it's gone down quite a bit from 2015. There's different, obviously the COVID years hurt that a lot, but you see a little bit of a decline. 2015 kind of flattened out for a few years and then went down again. Just showing some different things where our revenue sources have changed over the years. Don can attest to the fact that our municipal aid from the state, about 3 years ago, I think it was 200 and some thousand. It went up to about 400 and some thousand. And I think we got a notice just last week that it's going to go back down considerably, probably 200,000 again or so. So it's kind of up and down. Not a reliable, steady source. Also wanted to look at a little bit of our historical general fund budget revenues and expenses. So on the left-hand side is our budgeted general fund revenues over the last few years. On the right-hand side is our budgeted general fund expenses. As you notice, our budgeted amount of expenses exceeds our revenues every year. Usually that's because we have carryover from year to year, but it's not a great long-term precedent to always budget more than you have coming in. We'd like to get to where our budgeted expenses are right at the same as our revenues if we can. Luckily, we do have a nice, we're working on a cash reserve, and we, no department ever spends every dollar that they budget, and we usually bring in more than we budget for revenues, but we're pretty conservative on both those aspects. As you look, our revenues over the last few years had about a yearly increase of 1.83%, and our general fund expenses that we budget has average yearly increase of 2.35. Both those numbers are well below historical inflation averages. So I think that, like I said, we try and be very flat on our budget as much as we can, but some things go up and we can't do much about it, especially our fuel this year. You're going to see that when we get to budget time, how much our fuel has gone up. So with that in mind, again, we looked at different things that cities have used across the state, what the revenue sources. This first slide is some larger estimated amounts that we would see. So we look at a lot of places have dog and cat licenses. Some just have a dog license, some have both. They normally have a varied fee structure. They have for intact animals and then those that are spayed and neutered, different fee structures to try and encourage people to spay and neuter their pets to keep the population down. They usually also have some reduced rates for senior citizens. So we looked at somewhere starting at the reduced rate for senior citizens, maybe $8 a year up to $20 a year for intact animals. Based on what the national average is as far as dog ownership and cat ownership is where we came up with these numbers. And so that would be about $75,000 a year for dogs and about $24,000 a year for cats. Now, if you do and put in place dog and cat licensing, the state gets 50 cents off of each license. It's a state law that's if you have a license, the state gets the money. If you don't pay anything to it. So just to keep that in mind on that piece of that. Some places, you come to City Hall every year between January 1st and March 1st to get your license, have to have proof of rabies, etc. Others, the veterinarians actually do the licensing and then the city gives them $1 or $2 for every license they take. So there's different ways to look at that. Telecommunication tax. That would be on your cell phones, which right now ours just covers landlines. City of Norfolk basically just changed some language in theirs where they said all telecommunication devices, so pagers, cell phones, your tablets, that some tablets are used as a telecommunication device, et cetera, to make the language simple. And also, if something new and great comes in, the new telecommunication device, I don't think in 1980 we thought cell phones would even, that was something that was way far off. So that would kind of cover that without having to change language in the future for telecommunication tax. Looking at our peer cities that have that kind of a tax, we'd probably be looking around $200,000, $215,000 a year. Games of chance are your skill games. 5% of gross receipts is kind of common with the cities in the state that have a tax on there paid quarterly. We're estimating that'd be $220,000 a year. Hard to say for sure, but that's kind of going off the state average on those, what the state collects on those, and based on population where that would be at. Car rental occupation tax. Grand Island and Lincoln both have it's easy to find anyway that have a car rental occupation tax, anywhere from 5 to 7%. We looked at the 6%, which is the same as what Grand Island charges. About $37,000 a year just going off of Grand Island's income from their rental cars and scaling that back population-wise, and then scaling it back a little more just because we're a little bit smaller than they are. Stormwater utility fee is something that a number of cities our size to meet MS4 requirements have put in place where they put a fee on their utility bill. That then is used to pay for your street sweeping, your storm sewer cleaning, et cetera. Couple dollars a month on residential, $10 on commercial, $15 on industrial would be about $390,000 a year, and that would cover those people there. We also looked at some smaller fees. City code violations. This is one thing where Kearney may help us in some of our code enforcement. Kearney has a city code violation where they have a fee structure built in. Your first offense is $100, second offense $200 to $500, and third offense is $500 on up. That's unknown how much that would bring in. It'd be depending on how stringent we get on code enforcement. Food trucks is something, we see more food trucks all the time. Right now, we don't have anything on those. A lot of places have where you can have a yearly fee or else a per event fee, because we have a lot of those that come in maybe one time for an event. On that permit, you would also put on there that reminding them that they need to collect the city sales tax while they're at it. So just a couple things to look at there. It's kind of unknown. These are just estimates on what these would bring in, but just kind of estimating how many food trucks we see at different events and things. A couple places have on their commercial garbage service where they have a occupation tax. Probably the easiest one I saw was depending on how many vehicles, how many trucks they have in their fleet is where they base that fee off of. A general contractor fee would be another one you could look at and have some kind of a licensing procedure there. A billboard occupation tax, per billboard in town, you'd have a yearly fee for the people that own the billboard that then have it rented out. We do have a fee right now on our mobile home parks. It's just a flat fee no matter the size. A lot of places have it based on the number of spaces they have, and that's an escalating fee. The larger the park, the more they would charge. Another one that's starting to become popular is a solar panel permit fee, because solar panels are starting to be used by more places. So those are just some different options. Not saying good, bad, or indifferent, but I wanted to throw some different options out there that we saw that is different or something that we don't have. You could also look at, solicitor fees, street vendors, and things like that. So what I would suggest with this, looking at property tax reduction. Any of these fees that the council would decide to implement, we would take a two-year budget year, fiscal year 22-23 and fiscal year 23-24. All the revenues from these newly adopted fees and occupation taxes would be used for this cash reserve in those 2 years. We would do that so we could establish what these fees are actually going to bring in as a baseline. Once those 2 years of data are established, 50% of those new fees would go to the general fund. The other 50% would be used for direct property tax levy reduction. So if we look at all these fees that we've talked about, we'd anticipate revenues could be as much as $585,000, estimated property tax relief of about $293,000 per year, which is about 3.9% of our city property tax reduction. That'd be about 1.72 cents of the levy for reduction. That's based on our current valuation estimates. That stormwater utility fee we talked about would be separate from that $585,000. That $390,000 a year we would use to create the stormwater utility department to meet the MS4 requirements for storm sewer cleaning and street sweeping. Freeing up the street department funds then for additional concrete, curb and gutter replacement, street maintenance, et cetera. So we would probably move 4 to 5 individuals from the street department to this stormwater utility department, and then refill those jobs in the street department to do more street maintenance, et cetera, would be my thoughts on that. So that's the end of the presentation.
Thanks,
The
Lane.
last page that's not on there just gives you a look at the different cities that we looked at, the fees that they have and the different amounts they have, just so you can kind of compare that, and then the proposals that we had on the far end there, so. Questions, comments, just food for thought, and then we'd take, city would take your direction from the council from there.
So Lane, what is the MS4 requirement?
That is the, federal stormwater requirements, and based on the size of your city, they have different regulations, and we fall on MS4, and can't tell you exactly what that stands for, but it's the requirements we have for, stormwater pollution. That's why we have to have street sweepings. We have to, have a detailed plan to the federal government, telling them how often we clean our storm sewers, how often we clean our storm sewer boxes, et cetera, to keep pollutants out of the river water, because they all discharge to there, and so it's federal regulations that another unfunded mandate, and
Of course.
we have to meet that, and we have been meeting that.
Thank you.
Ty?
Lane, so on the 50-50 split to the property tax reduction fund, do you anticipate in some of those areas that the city will be providing additional services or recouping direct costs? Like, take, for example, the pet licensing fees. If 50% of that's going into operations, do you expect that we plan to spend more money in those areas, or how do you drive the 50-50 split?
I was just trying to look at some ways that we could hopefully shrink that budget deficit or that difference we have, and also give some property tax relief, so there'd be some benefit to the ratepayers and those that would be subject to these fees, as well as help the city kind of narrow our funding gap, so to speak. So,
Okay.
I mean,
That makes sense.
just came up with a plan. I was
Yeah.
looking for some ways to try and reduce our levy, but also help the city budget, so we can get on a better place, for the future, that would hopefully then drive us to more property tax reduction in the future.
So the idea is, okay, if we're gonna adopt more fees, that's the bad news, but the good news is we're gonna make this commitment to half of it.
Yep.
Half of it translating into levy reduction, okay.
I didn't want to just say, hey, here's some ways to bring in more income, but there is no benefit to the taxpayers. We wanted something concrete that would say, okay, we'll get those 2 years' worth that helps the city, cash reserve, and then we know exactly what those bring in. I mean, if they bring in 100,000 more than that, we would reduce the levy, even more. But that was just a plan I wanted to throw out to the council. I'm not saying it has to be adopted. I just wanted to have something for the council to try and work our way towards continuing to reduce that levy.
I really like this idea, especially dog license, cat license. I remember sitting here and the chief would come and present his budget, and we're gonna cut another person from the animal shelter. This just gives you a way to help that cause out, because I know we're bare bones over there. We cut that down to the teeth. Games of skill and chance. A little concerned about 5% of gross receipts, because I don't know if you're gonna get an accurate representation. So that's kind of a cash and carry business. There might be another way to do that, but again, our law enforcement, the past few shootings and robberies have occurred co-located by a game of skill and chance. So again, 50% of that money is going to help our police revenue, which is desperately needed.
I was just gonna say, we do have a $10 per game right now.
Yeah.
So we do have some.
I'd go $1,000 per game, to be perfectly honest with you, because those guys, and I've talked to them, they're killing it.
And most of
$10,
them
yeah.
don't pay.
No,
Yeah, we have a hard, all of our fee structures we have now, we don't have a good enforcement mechanism in place if they do not pay. I mean, Angie sends out the letters every year and those we know of, but it's tough and, you know, that's something as a group we need to talk about, how do we do more enforcement, but I mean,
And more money into the city coffers could help with the enforcement, so we take part of that. You know, in telecommunications tax, that's been low-hanging fruit forever, so most of these are well needed right now, so, nice job.
I'll just follow that the one that I gotta think about a little bit or look more into is the stormwater utility fee. So the MS4 requirements, are those fairly new requirements or have they been around a while?
they've been around, I mean, we're following those and they've been around a while. It just, a number of cities have started to do that where they create that separate, two reasons. Number one, so they can show the federal government what it's costing them to enforce these, but number two, you know, these were thrown on, you don't have a lot of ways to cover those costs. I mean, you know, street sweepers, 300,000 plus, and we bought used and they're working well for us, but they wore out. I mean, they're heavy use. The sewer jet, that's about a $600,000 machine now. We bought our last one used for, well, about a third of that, and that should last us 20 years, but at the same time, there's upkeep and things on those, and then, you know, to keep the street sweepers on the street and the sewer jet going all summer long when, the weather's not freezing, you know, that's a 4 to 6 person operation to really do it as we're supposed to, so.
So the idea is that gets passed through to the users more as kind of overhead charge each month versus rate based on use with reservoir calculations.
There's different schools of thought on that. Most cities just charge a straight across fee. Some of your communities, not so much in Nebraska, but across the nation, base it on maybe the square footage of your property because it's all based on stormwater runoff or on commercial businesses, how much of your lot's covered by concrete or how much, you know, let's say on a mall type situation, how much rooftop you have, et cetera. You know, there's no perfect way. I mean, if we were to do something like that, that would be super manpower intensive. And so we're looking at something fairly similar to what most of the cities across the state have.
Just to finish real quick on that, this will be quick, Mark. It's so like, for example, on the mall property, each business would have $10 on their bill, anybody that gets a bill.
It's anybody that gets a bill. We wouldn't, I mean, you know, an apartment complex, some of those, the owner just pays one bill for certain utilities, and so that'd be something we have to work through, but I was just, anybody that gets a bill, we wouldn't go after any, you know, specific, if there's 10 businesses under one roof and there's only one utility bill or something, we wouldn't have 10 different ones. I mean, I didn't foresee that anyway, but that's something we can sure work through.
Try to figure out a way to make it fair for everybody, yeah.
And that's the toughest part on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Well, Kent, just to clear up your question, before I forget, so the mall is billed as one entity?
I'd have to look into that, Mark. I don't
Okay.
know that for sure.
Yeah, cause I'm with you, that's not really fair and that would probably
Mall
be
mall
looked at a
stores
little
pay
more.
their own power bills. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Mall stores pay their own power bill, and then the
So
mall,
it would
and then
be
the mall
$10
offices pay for
per
the general
store.
area.
Okay, which is how I would want it to be more fair. I like user fees. I think they're a fair form of taxation, you know, if you don't use it, you don't have to pay for it. The rebate on property taxes, I've never liked it. You're taking my tax money and paying people to process it and then paying people more to give it back to me. So that I'm kinda, I know it sounds good, but to me it's,
Well,
yeah.
that's not a rebate. That's just we lower our levy.
Yeah, well, and, okay, in that respect, I would like to see, I know that the roads department will get more money because we'll have more in the general fund, but I would like to see a portion of this actually designated to go to the roads department so that we can get our gravel roads paved, keep up better with road repair, because that will save us even more money. And I think it's something that's greatly needed. I mean, I'm not completely And if it's just that that's gonna lower the property tax mill because we have more money, well, then we're in agreement there. So, you know, I would just like to see a percentage of it actually designated to go to the roads department. And not, and that you still get a fair share of the extra revenue before that. It's just something to think about.
And just to clarify, you're not proposing a rebate or refund on taxes, that's just a lower, when I said tax relief fund.
Right. It would just lower the
Yeah,
levy
well,
that the tax
yeah,
has
it
to
means you
levy.
just lower.
We would lower the amount collected.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how by the language, that's what I thought you were proposing.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, I'm not really a big favor of it. It would lower our mill levy, obviously, because we'll have more money.
That's what we would be doing, is just
Yeah.
lowering the mill levy, so it would be reflected on
Yeah.
their bills, you know, everyone's property tax bill from the county. It wouldn't be something where we collect the money and then give it back. It would be
Yeah.
just, we would look at the budget that year and lower our tax
Yeah.
asking amount equal to that.
Yeah, that's my mistake in misreading.
And where this is really important is, you know, when you look at a community, I'm gonna move to a community, you know, Kearney boasts of lowest property taxes in the state. There's a reason.
Yeah. lots
They
of
are
these.
really good at this. And it's all perception, you know, it's all perception. We need this year $31 million. How we get it is dependent upon us, you know, but we need $31 million to make our city run. So if we can show a lower property tax base, you know, through however we want to
Yeah.
do that, you know, but implement user fees, I think it's extremely brilliant.
This is one piece, I mean, I'm going to continue to research ways communities are doing things to lower their property tax reliance. This was the first step. I mean, maybe there's some other ways out there, haven't found them yet, but, you know, user fees as Mr. Rolls mentioned, that's how some of these cities that have much lower user fees do that. Some cities subsidize their general fund with their user fees on their water and sewer. They have pretty high water, sewer, maybe electrical rates, and then that goes back to the general fund. I'm not proposing that at all. But there's so many different ways, funding mechanisms, but this is when we started doing research across the state of what different cities had for user fees. These are some of the ones that stood out, so that's where we came up with this.
Lane, you mentioned that over the years, we have reduced our mill levy asking, and I appreciate that. And I think part of that's a reflection that we've been doing a much better job of keeping our bonded indebtedness down.
That's part of it, yes.
And that's a very important factor. Because if we start increasing our bonded indebtedness, then we're not gonna be able to lower our mill levy because we're gonna have an interest bill to pay.
And that, Ed, is a good point. That's something, Don and I have already started working on for the next budget year, where we want to keep our bonded indebtedness levy portion the same. And we've already planned out the projects we're doing right now, the projects, that the state's gonna have, the repaving of Jeffers and Dewey. We already have that planned out, that our bonded indebtedness levy will not change. You know, with the bond that'll fall off, the stuff that'll come on, we're trying to keep that levy right about that 14 cents on the bottom bonded indebtedness and not have that go up. So that's our long-term plan, is to have that bonded indebtedness levy portion stay right about that 14.2 cents.
Thank you.
And that point about roads is a big one that I think about a lot too. I don't really understand how fuel tax works. I've been needing to go study that and I just haven't got to it yet. And the same thing with tire tax. Do you know how do those work? Do they have a local component? Can they have a local component? What's that environment like?
I don't know the tire tax portion, I can't answer that though. The fuel tax is based on the state fuel tax, and then they divvy that out on some formulas they have to the communities. The state has a formula that they use, and then twice a year they review that to try and keep that money exactly where they want it to. On years where they lowered and they still bring in more fuel tax than they expected, it's a benefit to us because we've had years where we've brought in more on that fuel tax. This year they lowered at 1 penny on July 1st, and they lowered it 2 pennies on January 1st. Didn't see our fuel go down around town, but they did lower that tax. We're seeing probably a little bit underestimated what the state said we were going to be getting in our fuel tax, and so that hurts when they lower it too much or traveling goes down, et cetera. And we saw that with the COVID year where there, about 3 months, our fuel, that, our money we get from that fuel tax went way down. We ended up basically coming in close for that year, but we were down about 300,000 that year from what it was estimated to be. We're gonna be real close again this year, so it's out of our control, but that's somewhat how that works.
So towns can't or don't tack onto that, that's all state driven
All
and
state,
there's,
and
that's
we
all
can't-
set?
We
Okay,
can't
is
do
that how that
anything with
works?
that. Yeah, we can't, and our sales tax is not, we don't have the sales tax on the fuel, that's all through the state.
Right, that makes sense. Just one final comment for me on it is, I think one thing we should keep looking at is that we're a regional trade center town. And some communities, you know, go to food and beverage, service and some of those types of things. I think we should, in addition to the things you got on the table, keep thinking about the outsiders that use our infrastructure, use our city services, use the protection of our law enforcement, fire, first responders and all that. How do we keep making sure that they're paying a fair amount? Which is why I'm not in the camp of going and let's add a tax on everything that exists. But I could make an argument that we should go to food and beverage before we go to user fees on local folks, because we would catch, our net would be cast in a wider array.
I did mention that on that last sheet in there, you know, there is, Norfolk has a 2% of gross receipts on food and beverage tax, Grand Island has 1.5%. I think Kearney just renewed theirs, it's, I believe, 1% or 1.5%. They're building a new sports complex for about $34 million with that, so I mean, there are cities that do it. I didn't bring that up, and I didn't have a good way of really digging into the weeds to see what that would, what the estimated amount would be on that. I think those have to be spelled out for a specific cause if you do a food and beverage tax, you know, but, you know, that could be something, that's up to the council, but I didn't dig into that one because, those are usually highly controversial, and I just
Right. No, I
didn't cross
understand
that bridge, so.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's, I brought it up so you didn't have to in there, because it's.
Good job.
It's a hot topic, but I just think we should keep thinking about things that are fair to the people that use our infrastructure.
And when you look at the amount of, capture we get from people coming into the regional trade center, it is, I think 30 or 40% of our trade is probably people outside the city at least, so.
I have a question, maybe you can answer it. If we have a tax like that, can it go into the general fund, or does it have to be specified for specific use?
On food and beverage,
Their occupation taxes, so they have to be designated.
for what you use.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is that a lot of times cities will dedicate that to things that maybe you might pay for partially anyway, or it depends if you're trying to do an initiative like a new community center or something. I think there's my understanding is there's different approaches on that. Some with more of a project-specific approach and some of more of well, it's a project, but it might be a project we're gonna bear otherwise, and so we're trying to still push down our overall tax climate locally on. The numbers, when the housing study folks were here, and I think it was an off-the-cuff number, but they thought there was $800 to $1,000 to $1 million in a base food and beverage tax, and that was their off-the-cuff estimate at that point in time.
I'm not against these taxes.
Right.
I would have, I'll show my prejudice, I would have one stipulation that it not go for tourism.
Thank you, Mark.
I think you're right, I believe in Kearney's, it's about 900,000 a year that brings in for them, and that's how they paid for their new ball complex, and now they're switching it to that, sports complex, from my understanding of it. And, you know, that might be a little higher than what ours would be, but probably somewhat similar.
Just a quick comment. I really appreciate that you're tying this back to reducing taxes like that. I love that. What I would strongly suggest is, so there's some things on here that are real low hanging fruit. I'm never gonna notice $2 on my utility bill. Like, that's not something that's gonna bother me at all. But if I have to physically walk down to City Hall and pay $8 for
the rugrat mongrel running around in my backyard, I'm gonna be upset. So I think we need to be real smart about, you know, automating and making this as easy as possible, so that the stress level of facilitating these are as easy as possible, so.
I appreciate that. I mean, that's something, we're constantly looking at our softwares and things, and what can people do from their computer at home? And I don't know if that would be something or not, but I mean, we're looking at, can you get a fence permit at 3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, I tell people I'm a 3 o'clock in the morning guy. I wake up, I can't turn off the brain, I get on the computer and I do stuff. If I could pay for a fence permit, I would. So if, things like that, I appreciate that, because we would be continue looking for ways that we can do that where it doesn't take city staff time, people don't have to drive down here, et cetera. So it's
Thank you.
good thoughts.
I just want to make one comment. We talk about lowering property tax, but really it's lowering the mill levy. If the value of your property goes up, your taxes are not going to go down. Right?
And valuations out of our
Affect
control
it.
here, but
Yes,
yes.
I know, but I just want to,
Yep. Well, I'm talking about lowering the mill levy.
mill levy, right. Thank you.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Yay. Thank you for making the
Time for another meeting.
Unlucky you.
Are you going to the
Oh.
Republican meeting?
I don't know. I don't know. I. If I go along. I know she doesn't wanna go, probably.